here. This panel is one that I'm super excited about. I've been looking forward to this, and I think based on some of the questions that everybody was asking yesterday and some of the discussions today, I think y'all are already ready to talk about journalism and advocacy and how does journalism fit within PIC and how does PIC fit within journalism. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I have some questions I'm going to pose for all of our fabulous panelists, but I'm going to have them introduce themselves. And as you introduce yourself, what I want you to also talk about is what role you think that journalism is supposed to play in society, and to what extent you think that journalism or media are actually living up to those expectations. So we'll start there. And we'll start with Lois here on this end and just work our way down.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lois. I use she, they pronouns. I am a storyteller, an artist, a facilitator, and I'm joining y'all today as the program director of Shift Press, which is a youth publication here in the city. We are specifically aiming to highlight how young people move power in the city of Houston. And yeah, we had the amazing pleasure of working with Summer, and so I'm really, really excited for this conversation. Perhaps another really important tidbit as far as like framing or contextualizing how I frame the world. I am an immigrant, I am Black, I am queer. And yeah, so the role of journalism, I believe it's a very important tool for giving especially marginalized folk an opportunity to interrogate power, an opportunity to interrogate the systems that they are, that impact them. The second part of that question.
Is journalism, media, journalists, are they living up to that expectation?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely not. And it's not because of the incredible storytellers who are in this work. It's largely because, again, the systems that are informing how people are participating in, you know, and working within journalism are creating very, very difficult ways for folks to move within that industry and within that space. And so, there's a lot of room there to create a lot of change. So I'm gonna pass it along because we're gonna dive deeper.
Yes. So I'm Salwa Jordi. I'm really excited to be here. I'm the communications director for Latinitas. We're actually a nonprofit organization based in Austin, and we have the mission to empower girls and young students through media and technology. So I can go on and on and on. That's one of my roles, but I'm actually a freelance reporter for Telemundo Austin. I've been doing that for a long time, and before that, I created my own blog in Spanish because my dream was to work on TV. And back, 12 years ago, unfortunately, those opportunities were not as available as now, or perhaps were more inclusive. I can go on. I'll share more about Latinitas throughout the panel and everything that we do. But I feel like journalism. I agree with you. I think it's a tool, to empower. It's an opportunity to inform. And create opportunities for others. I do think that nowadays, when it comes to journalism and media, we are doing a good job. There's different outlets, people are being outspoken, and social media, nowadays, everything, it's there. So I feel that our voices are being heard, and we're, I guess, in different times. So I'll pass it out to you, Aubrey.
Hey everybody, I'm Aubrey Nagel. I am the Director of Practice Change at Resolve Philly. And what that means, Resolve Philly is a journalism nonprofit based in Philadelphia. We create journalism, we create news and editorial products, and we have a whole community engagement team that answers a lot of the questions y'all have been asking the past couple days about engagement. Everyone loves what our team does so much that they've been asking us to train them on it. So now I lead Modifier, which is our professional development arm. But my expertise, in addition to leading Modifier, is in language and framing. And so I spend a lot of time working with journalists to understand the impact of the words that they choose and the framings that they use on the audiences that they are creating their work for, or believe that they are creating their work for, or want to be creating their work for, and helping them realign their intent with their impact. So with that said, what I believe journalism should be doing, what the duty of the field is to distribute information in a way that helps us solve our collective problems. The idea of, standing up for the little guy and helping to speak truth to power, so that we all are working from the same fact-based reality, so that we can make collective decisions as communities, whatever that, the scale of that community looks like. I do not think we are living up to that right now, considering there are lots of different realities that we are all living in, depending on what facts you choose to believe or accept. And frankly, that a lot of, in political reporting specifically, or in civic reporting, a lot of the journalism that we see right now is not designed to be actionable to audiences. It's often designed to keep, a palace intrigue story drama going among politicians and those who follow it for sport, essentially. A lot of it, de facto, becomes entertainment. It's not being used for anything but keeping up with the story. So for me, a lot of times we're not living up to that potential.
Just want to give space. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yes, for sure. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Sheehan. I have the pleasure of serving as the managing director for our Center for Public Interest Communications at the University of Florida, as well as a senior lecturer of journalism. I guess at this point I have to classify myself as a recovering journalist because I'm not actually in an active newsroom right now, but have a history of kind of probably being one of the last of the generation of the classically trained public affairs journalists. I came up in the industry as the industry was transforming as well, so caught the tail end of what many of the old guard would consider the glory years, but also helped to lead that evolution. I've been kind of cursed to be followed throughout my career by the word innovation, including from my time at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on the innovations desk, AKA the internet, all the way up to, my students are like, oh God, you're old. And I'm like, well, technically, Harry Potter's 2.5 months older than I am in the classic things, so take that as you will. I've also had the pleasure of being a news editor at the Washington Post, have an MBA, so I kind of bridge the gap between the newsroom and the business side, have that understanding, as Anne kind of alluded earlier. Systems and operations are kind of my thing, and I've found my way to that as well. And then at some point kind of got pulled into academia. I've been at Florida for 11 years now, where I was originally designed to kind of help bridge gaps between traditional models of media and bring in the new and emerging ways of thinking about doing journalism, including as the inaugural director of our Innovation News Center, and now get to play in this fascinating world of public interest communications and explore those sort of simpatico things there. So getting to Summer's question about the role of journalism in society, I think we need to be very sure that how we define these words. And I think, a theme that I'm hearing throughout our conversation is we're using the same words, but not necessarily talking about the same thing. So to me, journalism is an act. It is a way of doing things. It is not an industry, and it is not a product. So news is also sometimes used in terms of journalism, and I think we need to explore the distinctions there. And I love your entertainment aspect of things too. I call it infotainment. So a lot of times what we consider journalism or news media really is infotainment. So what is journalism? Well, journalism has to be that independent kind of need in society to make sure that we're having kind of conversations across tribes, across perspectives, and there's a really great role of having that sort of lens that holds up to whoever's in power, whoever's not in power, to make sure that those perspectives and conversations are colliding and that we're kind of building the best and largest society that we can. So it really gets back into that tenets of lowercase liberal democracy and journalism's critical role there.
I like that you bring up the idea that we need to interrogate how we're using these words, right? Because we do understand them differently. And in listening to y'all's answers of what role journalism is playing, you know, you talked about power, empowerment, change, engagement, effect, solving problems, collective problems, fact-based, and you know, this need to be actionable for citizens. So what I don't hear, though, is that you are supposed to be advocating or you are supposed to be doing activism. So to what extent can we see journalism as a form of activism or as a form of advocacy, and think about the similarities and the differences between journalism and activism or advocacy, and then give us some examples from your own work, from your own experiences in journalism with activism or advocacy. And we'll start, you're looking right at me,
I'm looking at you because, I'll go straight with Latinitas. So we're doing this, you know, our mission, you know, nonprofit, empowering, you know, girls, youth, and actually parents. And we have media programs and we have a magazine. So through our magazine, you know, I feel it's a form of activism where our writers and interns, you know, can write of so many things, you know, especially it could be our programs, it could be our community, and we actually also have a podcast too that interviews community members in different topics and to uplift our voices. So I feel with those two media programs that we have going on, we're able to do that, and I guess like that's my example of perhaps how we are doing it. And then, you know, social media too, specifically to our mission and like the different campaigns that we have, uplifting our mission and showing our impact. That's the way that, in our case, I feel that there are tools and things that you can do to empower others and show a way that, you know, you're trying to uplift others and show your mission through a podcast or a magazine, or even through your website, like through your news. I always tell that it's always nice to hear perhaps from your executive or your team, because their stories or their living experience is a way at times to show that they're, you know, speaking up for what they believe and, you know, what our cause might be. So I don't know, that's what just came to my mind right away, the magazine and the podcast, because I'm in the process of rebranding too. So I'm excited because a fellow coworker is here and he runs the podcast. So yes, it's just a way to communicate, and it's a hot thing to do. It's interesting for me how digital media at times is not as consumed as much as a podcast. It's been interesting as a nonprofit just for me to see that, how the podcast is getting so much traction, and at times the magazine, it's there. So it's just interesting to think about. I just leave it there. I'm all over the place. I'm excited about my rebrand.
I'm going to ask just a quick follow-up question. You mentioned campaigns. Can you tell us about one particular campaign that y'all did?
Yes. So Cody stood up to me, because of what he said. In nonprofit, you go, you know, from your executive team, your development, and your program. And communications at times falls last because you have to interact with, you know, development and communications. So throughout the year, I always say, you know, make sure you have your calendar. And right now, summer, I'm thinking of my fundraising campaign. So on Saturday, we have this event, it's called Purple Party. And we're celebrating 21 years. And of course, it ends the fiscal year. And through that, we were really strategic, of course, you know, with videos. But at times, it's showing the different faces of Latinitas. That, you know, we're serving minorities and that we're being inclusive. And it's non-binary, it's Black, Latino. So you see all through that through social media. So, I could see that that's like my biggest campaign. Even if you go to Latinitas, you just see All Purple Party and you see, you know, what we've done like in the last year and what you can expect from us. So that's one thing. When it comes to programming, conferences and just uplifting what each conference might be. So I don't know if that answered the question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm happy to weigh in. So for me, advocacy and journalism are very much intertwined. I really believe that all journalism is advocacy in some form. You're advocating for a topic to take up space in the public conversation, and we have limited time and space to do that, even though we might say, oh, there's unlimited space on the internet, but there is not unlimited space in the day for people to consume content, and they are busy, and so we are choosing what to amplify and what to not amplify as journalists, and so we are advocating for that conversation to happen. And if that conversation, if the tone of that conversation is normalization of any problem that might exist, then we are advocating for the status quo, and that is still advocating. We, as an industry, the news industry tends to likes to believe that it is, they are not advocating for anything, that advocacy is a dirty word, and advocacy journalism is not a real thing, and I know we'll kind of talk about that later, but for me, yeah, there's no pulling those things apart. And really, there are a lot of different ways that journalists are employing advocacy by almost a different name in a way to kind of work it into the acceptable paradigms of objectivity and what that might look like, and that's through the increase in opinion journalism and then through personality-driven media branding and personal branding and things like that. But I do think that there is some really great emerging work in how these things are talked about as being separate, but are bringing those principles deeper into the work. One of those, we talk a lot about different journalisms, engaged journalism, solutions journalism. One that I'm particularly fond of is solidarity journalism. Great colleague in the field, Anita Varma, who runs the Solidarity Journalism Initiative at UT Austin. She has been promoting the belief that for solidarity journalism to stand in solidarity with the communities that we're covering, we need to treat any social injustice as a newsworthy issue to be covered. And just because it is not new does not mean it is not news, and that we are standing in empathy and in solidarity with all of the communities that we cover. And I think that's a really great way to align ourselves with those principles and to reframe how we are approaching framing a story. To give an example of how that works in our work at Resolve Philly, in the agenda setting mode of advocacy, we've run a newsroom collaborative for the past couple of years, the past 5 years, called Broke in Philly, which is a collaborative of 29 newsrooms, I believe now, in Philadelphia, who committed to each other to collaborate on journalism that amplifies solutions to economic inequity and poverty in Philadelphia. And so the commitment was to raise the awareness, but not that anybody needs awareness of poverty in Philadelphia, but awareness of the solutions and bring people together and choose to amplify the network effects of everybody focusing on that at once. And that was based off of a prior collaboration called the Reentry Project, which did the same thing, solutions to prisoner reentry. And that was, again, like a conscious choice among those newsrooms to raise the platform of that topic. And so in that way, I don't think any of the partners would stand up and shout, that was advocacy work, but it was, in my opinion.
Yeah. Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, I would echo that with a hearty amen, but also take it one step further. I think all forms of communication are a bit of advocacy. Mm-hmm. That when we are sharing different perspectives, sharing different views, helping people see the world in a different way, we're advocating for a specific change, whether we're intentionally designing to do that or not. So I kind of get worried a little bit when people start to claim their activities as advocacy, because then it starts to, other people don't get to see themselves in that. And I think sometimes that can be very limiting in that. So if we look at advocacy of a spectrum from special interest to public interest communications, we see that all of the kind of disciplines and all of our activities fall someplace on that spectrum. It's just what is your primary motivation? what communities are you serving? And I think what sets journalism different from a lot of these other things is that kind of independent lens, that you're not going in with preconceived decisions and unable to look at some of both the benefits but also some of the vulnerabilities of a lot of these issues. So I think we create this false equivalency and call it objectivity. So I would love for our industry to move from objectivity to independence and really define independence.
Yes.
Because we can cover these issues, and I want to learn more about the project too. So we'll chat after. So yeah, don't.
I want to learn about that too, because I feel, and I'm sorry, I'm chiming in, but as nonprofits, it's so hard at times to get news coverage. Like, you have to see me prepping for a press release, and I send the press release the month before, and then I'm pretty much, I'll be hustling for someone to come, and that way we could share our story. So at times it's so hard because we have to create our own source of information and push it out. And oh my God, I love that. I want to learn more about that.
I may be a heretic here, but don't waste your time on press releases.
Yeah, okay.
Don't waste your time
Frank,
on press
you
releases.
heard that.
You have as much, your organization has as much power as every other broadcast or paper there. And if you can reach the community that you need to reach with your owned media, do it. Don't waste your time on trying to attract journalists who have different priorities, who, there may not be something that journalism needs to spend its time on you. Journalism is not amplification. It should never be, except there's a lot of newsrooms that do that. And we need to break that habit. So give yourself permission not to do that.
Thank you.
Not that it's mine to give, but just advocating for that.
So when I think of journalism as a form of advocacy, I think of I come from a background in slam. And if y'all see me snapping in agreement, that's where that comes from. And there's so many poets, I've come across so many poets who are like, yeah, my poems are like the way in which I advocate for my people and my cause. And I think it's like, and poems themselves can be very moving, and most forms of really, of storytelling can be very, very moving, but I think it becomes advocacy when it moves past that. And similarly with journalism, it's like, how are you using these important narratives to engage and support? And so for Shift Press, specifically in the work that we do, we have media trainings not only to show young people that, you can hit up a journalist, you can hit up a newsroom, but also you can write your piece, right? And also you can make your own pitches. And it looks like using the pieces that you are pushing out to really have deeper forms of engagement that contextualize, that look at history, that look at systems, that look at power. And so I think in a broader sense, that's when journalism does become a form of advocacy.
And you bring up storytelling in these media trainings. So my next question for you all is, what exactly does advocacy journalism entail? So when we're thinking about practices, when we're thinking about narratives and storytelling and news values and newsworthiness, how do we make sure that all of those things that go into doing journalism, how do we make sure that that still is advocating and standing with the people who we should be standing with as, supposed defenders of democracy and, comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, all that?
For us, it's just making sure that the young people are informing the decisions that we make around our programming and our work, right? We make quite a diligent effort to keep young folk at the center of decision making. We ask them for feedback all the time. So in addition to just educational efforts, in addition to making sure that it's the young folks' voices that are driving all the that are represented in the pieces that we publish, but we also make sure that they're the ones who are hey, this space is not conducive for young folk to come through because it's not the right physical location, it's not the right time, it's not the right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so, yeah, and I've seen that in pretty much every other like minoritized community that I have ever had the privilege of being a part of or been invited to. It's like, hey, this is not the language that we use. This is not the, and so that kind of having them not only, young folk not only give input, but also drive those kinds of decisions has been really important.
I can echo that too. I feel that Latinitas, I mean, we're working as a team. So, we hear from, of course, the programs, because that's where, everything is created, but also the parents have an input, and of course, the students that we're serving. And also, you hear from the volunteers, who provide the feedback. And I go to the surveys too, just because it's pretty realistic, just to see what's working and perhaps what's not working. So it's just this whole, I feel like, collaboration that perhaps in nonprofit happens. And I do believe in community partners, going to perhaps those organizations who are doing similar work and who are serving the same population. And you get to learn from them and see, what's working and what's not working. And we go from there. But through different programmings, we do virtual too. So it's interesting. I do believe that getting feedback and getting those surveys will help us grow and figuring things out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that that advocacy can or does show up in journalism beyond it being, the agenda setting level being, de facto advocacy. I'm glad that you brought up the language level of, word choice that has the power to, bring a different discourse up. The words that we use, whether we use dehumanizing or rehumanizing language, I forget who said that earlier, has the ability to shape how people think about others. That is its own form of advocacy. But the two ways I think that are most critical are tone and having a ability to move things in and out of the sphere of consensus. If those of you who are familiar with Holland spheres, the concept of where news media falls between the sphere of consensus, the sphere of legitimate controversy, which is where a lot of idealized traditional journalism lives, where there's sides to every debate, and then there's the sphere of basically taboo things we don't talk about. And we have the ability as journalists and as media to move topics in and out of of those spheres based on how we talk about them. A maybe more positive example is the movement of the conversation around legalizing marijuana has moved very much into from outside to the spheres to not quite at the sphere of consensus level, but is definitely within legitimate controversy and has been moved. But we're seeing through the capitulation to both sidesism in the political sphere that the humanity of trans people is being moved into the sphere of legitimate controversy instead of the consensus level where it has been recently. And that is, the news media is helping to do that, and they are perpetuating the choices that the right, the extremist right are making to make that happen. So that is advocacy in its own way. And again, somebody earlier had said advocacy is not always positive social change or activism. And then the way that can come across, the way we can move things in and out of those spheres of discourse are really through the tone of coverage, which is so difficult to put your finger on sometimes. It's very much a when you see it type of process in journalism. But when you can tell when a newsroom and when a news product is not taking a side, right? Because it's treating everything as this is normal, even when the world around us is burning down, and we're breaking every single democratic norm that we've established. Treating it all like just another day in the news shows the adherence to objectivity, or the ideas of objectivity that creates harm and perpetuates harm and normalizes, really harmful leadership and hurts democracy. But when we operate from a place of moral clarity, you mentioned independence as almost opposition or just alternative to objectivity. Moral clarity is another phrase that's been used. Started the conversation largely with Wesley Lowery, a journalist who has written tons about this. That moral clarity is really, establishing values as a person, as a newsroom, using the journalism as a process, and objectivity as a process to come to facts, but allowing those facts to help you understand the world and bring that to your audience. To understand, do you value social justice? Do you value equality? Do you value human rights? And if what you're seeing out there does not align with those things, then you are open about your audience with them, and you don't just treat them as just another day at the news. So I think those are the two, tone and that, moving things in and out of the sphere of consensus are those two big sites of advocacy for me.
I think a lot of times when we're talking about advocacy in journalism, we're really talking about inclusivity in journalism. And if we attack it from that frame, or not, that's a very hostile word, if we focus on it, on that frame, maybe we might even make some more progress. Because I love that you mentioned the Wes Lowery example. Obviously, the Washington Post has a great place in my heart. I was not there at that time. But that was a perfect example of how if there were more voices of different lived experiences in the Post leadership, that conversation would have gone a different way. And I think we have to be concerned about that because of the economics of the news industry themselves, which again is different than journalism and different than media. We're seeing a concentration of power and a certain lived experience. Now, I'm a walking embodiment of the man. I'm sorry, I share every identity as the oppressor. But, even I was an outsider at the Washington Post coming from a state school. So we need to know that our educational background, our family background, our financial means, we're kind of concentrating a lot of what we consider the free press at the top. So we need to be much more inclusive, much better about bringing different lived experiences and different backgrounds into the newsroom and finding opportunities where that is sustainable. Not everybody, we talked about this earlier, not everybody can afford to take a low-paid internship to work their way up. How can we create better feeder systems from the sort of organizational-based media organizations that aren't a traditional newsroom that people can graduate to? Because you're using the same tools, you're using the same products, it's the same thing, it's just a different approach.
And go ahead, Liz.
I'm especially excited for the work that especially organizers and storytellers within organizing spaces are doing to move that, the consensus around prison abolition, especially here in Houston. So I just wanted to echo that, and uplift that and the work that the folks are doing around that here.
Yeah, absolutely. Aubrey and Matt, you both kind of, you brought up objectivity and the spheres of discourse, and then Matt, you talking about the lack of diversity in the newsrooms, and then we have the creation of Shift Press and creation of Latinitas in order to try and overcome some of those deficiencies in mainstream media. So the thing I'd like y'all to talk about now is what are some of the challenges or obstacles that you have to overcome in order to be able to incorporate advocacy and activism into mainstream journalism, right? Because yes, having Latinitas and having Shift Press and the work that Resolve Philly does is so important, but we have to think about reach. We have to think about, reaching those decision makers, unfortunately, and it's still mainstream media that has that platform. So how can we bring what y'all are doing better into mainstream media? $1 million question, right?
It's a hard question.
One way that we're doing it is through consulting. Modifier, the part that I lead, we are going, we like to use the word infiltrate, but try to get into as many large news organizations as we can to educate them on the way that we do journalism and the way that we operate from our values and mission and from a community-centered space. But yeah, the challenges to overcome in the structures of white supremacy embedded in the news industry, which is the home of so much journalism, really like the ways to get that are, as you said, changing the makeup of newsrooms themselves. But also, I think in the journalism, it's possible to focus more on, there's different ways that I think we've finagled buy-in of these ideas with mainstream journalists. And that is focusing on audience information needs as a way to think about what your community is looking for when they go looking for information. And they might not be going to the news. Who are they going to for it? And what is the information that they're actually looking for? And unfortunately, you can always make a business argument for a lot of these things. So audience info needs is like a kind of keyword for buy-in from the decision makers. And also, another thing we've used is in promoting community engagement practices, because that is often, there's not time made for that either, just like so many of the researchers have been saying these past 2 days, explaining the stories of the community as stories that nobody else has covered before. Playing off of the PR that news uses itself of, you'll be breaking this story, this is something that has gone uncovered for so long. So yeah, unfortunately, playing the biases of decision makers against them tends to be a successful track.
It's really a challenge because sometimes I think when the I guess more general media picks up these stories, there's often an appropriation that occurs, and I don't want to diminish the importance of these outlets, particularly focused on communities that are underserved by the larger news organizations. They're important, and their voices are needed. They are often helping those organizations. I agree with you. I hate the frame of happening now, right? The CNN thing, because it's been happening for a while. We're just paying attention now. So I wish I had a solution for you, Summer. I don't. But one thing I wish we had more of a public discussion about is our discovery process. Because the content is there. The content doesn't need the Washington Post to pick something up for it to go viral or for people to get engaged in it. And it's serving a specific community, but how does it go beyond kind of the bubbles of the people that are already part of that conversation? And I think we need to have kind of a national conversation around our discovery and the algorithms that are driving that. Because right now, they're not in the public service. They're feeding advertising and they're creating outrage. So yes, your story is going to be seen by people that agree with you already. But society doesn't change by singing to the choir. We need to have those conversations across our identities. So if we can have an outcome, I wish that would be it. I wish we could have a public conversation around kind of finding a better tool, identifying a better advocate, identifying a better person to help us with that. Or if that doesn't work, looking at policy.
Can I just add something real quick? This conversation came up a bit yesterday in the public interest technology panel, and you mentioned algorithms definitely of major social media sites not being in the public interest at all. We can't have the conversation around solutions to bringing advocacy and making journalism more in the public interest, the news industry in the public interest, without talking about capitalism and white supremacist capitalism in general. That's why the social media sites are turning the way that they are. That's why the social media sites are prioritizing engagement. It is to make money, and that is why the news industry has its obsession with objectivity. That is in the business interest. That is not because that stems from newspapers of the early days learning that they could make more money by being more neutral. That's where all of that comes from, and it's not from some golden age of a philosophical objectivity. It's from the business interest, and unless we can try to decouple capitalism with how journalism is produced in this country, I think we'll have a hard time reaching those values.
You better say that.
That is true.
That's right.
Well, and I think we're in the midst of a transition too. Like if we look at our journalism history, and obviously I'm not a journalism historian, but we moved from a partisan press to this notion of objectivity during the consolidation of news industry. But I think we're seeing a further evolution to that partisan press, because the one thing about trust in news that we often undervalue if we talk about trust in news writ large, people are going to say it's low. But if you ask folks about what news, if the news organization that they pay attention in, do you trust to that? They're going to say it's high because it affirms their identities and how they see themselves in the world. So I would say that at least on the national level, we've got a flavor for however you identify, if you use kind of the big pillars of things. And that's serving well, and that's a capitalistic society thing too. It's just how do we, and will we ever have that, and well, we didn't, but can we accomplish that, like, this is the word, and this is the conversation? Because even when we were back in the day of the objective press, vast swaths of our society were underrepresented and continue to be.
I used to think as nonprofit newsrooms are going to be the,
Yes.
and then when we look at nonprofit in a capitalist world, it's like, we're over here begging for pennies from rich people who already have an agenda. And I hate being messy, y'all, I really do.
Amen to that.
I also don't know, I really do hate being messy. I mean, like, you know, rich folk came here a few years ago and asked everybody and their mama, it's like, hey, what would y'all like to see in a newsroom that was independent and was not motivated by like blah, 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 blah. And everybody was like, yeah, no, continue funding the folks who are actually doing the work with the communities that are, you know, that is concerning. And a few years later, all the money went to start something different and new and flashy, and none of the people that they were talking to, they didn't see any drop of that money. And so I'm like, yeah, it can't be the same model of nonprofit newsrooms. It can't be folks begging money from funders anymore. And it needs to be treated as like a public good, like a public service, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's policy all the way. That's policy all the way.
I agree with you. I think so too. I mean, like, I think I could relate so much because it's like nonprofit, but like for us, you know, it takes community engagement, like somebody always, you know, being out there, you know, having a table and talking to other people, and that way we can reach to others, and then having ambassadors. You know, you get to know volunteers who carries power throughout the community, and then they become ambassadors, and then they can reach to others. Because at times, like you said, I'm not writing a press release anytime soon, but it's just so hard at times to have a voice. It's like who you know that can get you there, and it's hard. It's hard, or you become a hot topic throughout the year whenever you know, oh, maybe 3% Latinas are not working in, you know, work in tech, or you know, whenever it's something hot, they'll approach you. But whenever it's a lived experience or you're doing good, it's just so hard to get the word out. It's just so hard.
Well, and that goes back to what Aubrey, you said earlier, or maybe it was Matt, I can't remember. Somebody at this end said something that is important, right? That just because it's not new doesn't mean it's not newsworthy, right? We have to keep that in mind, that you know, social justice is always a story.
Yes.
But Lois, you bring up the public interest, right? And this is the Summer Institute, right? We're talking about public interest communication. And in the last panel, we had that wonderful slide over there, I guess over there too, that talked about how when we think about public interest communications, we need to keep in mind that it's fact-based, that it resonates, that it strives for the greater good, it seeks a solution, and it uses strategy to do so. So Matt, I'm gonna send this over to you. How is journalism different or the same than public interest communications?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it is, I don't want to cop out and say that all public interest communication, I mean, journalism could be public interest communication, but not all public interest communication could be journalism, and vice versa. So, you know, it's like, it's a mammal, but it's also a platypus, but then when it's got the fedora on, it's Perry the platypus, so yeah. So I think, when I think about journalism, which I do a lot, and then working in the center, clearly I've drunk Anne's Kool-Aid, and Angela, and the fabulous people here. Journalism doesn't always have that call to action that I think the best public journalism does, or public interest communication does. And I think you can engage in a public interest communication campaign with an objective in mind. You have a perspective, whether you're a grantor or a funder or an advocate, an ally, whatever you are, you can engage in a public interest communication campaign to help transform that world as long as it is in the public's interest. And we kind of define the public's interest as living up to what's in the Declaration of Independence, that everybody's entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? That we amortize the benefits and the risks of living in a society. So I think that's there, whereas journalism, again, we need that objective lens. We need to make sure that we are ensuring that there's kind of an arbiter that what we say we're doing, we're actually doing, and we don't fall into that bad habit of, well, we're doing good work, so we're gonna ignore the bad things that are happening over here. And I think we sometimes need people to call us to account so we can be better versions of ourselves and accomplish that. And I think that's the role of journalism, and kind of where it might be a little bit distinct from public interest communication, but I think the act of journalism itself is an act of public interest communication.
Yeah. And so for the rest of our panelists, when we think about that call to action, right, to what extent does the journalism that y'all do include calls to action? And should all journalism include that call to action, or a call to action?
I mean, when it comes to, it's interesting because, I mean, as a nonprofit, you're either, we're always, of course, always trying to fundraise. I mean, for me, that's like the biggest, one of like our goals. Like, we want to inform our mission, we want to empower others, we want to uplift each other. But of course, at times my call to action is, I'll go through a campaign and, if you're interested to learn more, donate. Or if you want to become a volunteer, and this is why, please, subscribe to our newsletter and volunteer. Or if you, want to be a speaker in one of our conferences. So it's interesting because it's always, I feel, it's, to empower, gain, of course, traction and donors or gain volunteers. Sometimes I think each campaign might be different, but at times those are the three things that in my mind that I'm just like at times really focused on, just because as a nonprofit, we don't have the resources, we have limited staffing, so you're always perhaps hustling. So always my call to actions might be perhaps those things, and then to collaborate with other nonprofits that we're teaming up with and gain more traction. I think collaboration, for my field, collaboration is key. If we don't collaborate with other partners who might, uplift you or lift each other, at times we don't gain traction.
Lois?
Yeah, I keep thinking about the work that happens outside of the story itself. I mean, from the workshops that we do with our young folk to the convening that we had last year called News for Us. The first half of it was exclusively for the young folk who work with us, and primarily the young people that kind of like come to us are youth organizers, and we interrogated how, news and stories move power, right, for half the day. And we were very clear that, like, this needs to be driven by them, and that, like, our purpose wasn't to uphold some objective agenda. And we we keep teaching both in our workshops and in that convening that they are the ones who can drive the narrative, right? They can be the ones who write the story, and they can hold their experiences. In the second half, though, we invited pretty much everyone in the city, and these are adults who are in the space. Many of them were journalists themselves for like big old papers and publications, and we didn't shy away from calling folks out and saying that, hey, listen, the work y'all doing ain't really helping kiddos, all right? And couched it in very real context, that like there are children dying in Harris County jail right now, right? There are children who are living the impact of decisions that are being made every Tuesday at a city level, at a county level, et cetera, right? And from that, there's a good number of people who have just been reaching out throughout the course of the year, like, how do we do things and stuff? Because we were moved. I was like, yeah, no, and it wasn't, so yeah, it worked. Listen, shame, it does things, okay? And stuff. But yeah, I feel like not shying away from calling out the way, the ecosystem is, and inviting the demographic that we are trying to reach to, take the reins, has been the way in which we do that. And it doesn't necessarily always just happen within the stories that we publish, but the work that we do outside as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the question about whether calls to action should be included in journalism, are they, and how, it's really interesting because they are implicitly in so much journalism already. Mm-hmm. Through, not to sound like a broken record, but certainly through agenda setting, but also through parts of the journalism world and the news industry that are considered soft news or service journalism, depending on what sector of the industry you're in. Service journalism might encompass just like any guide to an experience, often a consumer experience. And those, they might not literally say, buy this thing. Sometimes they literally do say, buy this thing. But if you're, reviewing a restaurant positively or just announcing that a restaurant opened, depending on how many restaurants open in your city, if you just chose that one, that is a call to action. But that, so I think that part is more understood among journalists, that is what that is for. And that's why it is often, the people who are in roles that support lifestyle and service journalism are often marginalized within the newsroom and are often from marginalized spaces as well. And so it's interesting to show that the evidence of when calls to action are pretty much part of the status quo in journalism that is marginalized. But those also exist in other spaces that are viewed more positively as more, legitimate journalism. When a newsroom publishes an investigation, I'm going to reference one of my coworkers' investigations, my colleague Steve Volk, our investigative reporter, found that the Philadelphia Department of, the DHS, had been keeping the Social Security checks of foster children and had stolen millions of dollars from them. They had no reason to take the money, but they had been, and they had been using that money. The reason for publishing that is not just so everyone knows that it happened, but so that it changes. And the call to action is directed then at the policymakers. And I'm happy to say that policy did immediately change within a week. And that money was able to be returned to the people that it belonged to. That policy is no longer in place. So this happens all the time. We just don't, again, just the idea of there's so much advocacy already in mainstream journalism that we don't identify as that because of certain privileges and who it serves. So, I think we should be more welcome to calls to action that serve social justice and equity, and be more blatant about our values and moral clarity to allow that to be legitimized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you think about the kind of journalism that is celebrated every year with the Pulitzers, it's the journalism that has a change. It's the journalism that doesn't just shine a light on some wrongdoing, but that actually resulted in a change, in a fix, in a solution to whatever that problem was, which is a form of activism, right? We just don't want to call it that because it doesn't align with that misplaced idea of objectivity. And, it's just, I was, in all of the classes that I teach and in all of the research that I do, it's focused on this idea of trying to re-understand what objectivity means, especially in the face of injustice and in the need to achieve justice racially, environmentally, on so many different levels with our society today. But is there a point at which it becomes too much, right? So if we think that the role of a journalist really is to advocate and really is to do some kind of activism to achieve change, what happens though, or I guess where do we draw that line, right? Because now we do have people who are advocating or who have pushed trans rights, for example, from that realm of consensus to something that's suddenly up for debate. So how do we ensure that we can be activists and do advocacy for things that really are for the greater good and still be able to say this is where we draw the line, right? So that this kind of advocacy is okay for journalists to do, but not this kind. So how do we make that distinction?
It's interesting how we look at y'all.
I mean, I would love to learn your perspective on that question too. But.
I mean, so in our case, of course, it's all about uplifting our mission. So lucky enough, Latinitas, we have our, we have our magazine, we have our podcast, we have a really strong well, it's not in my database, but when it comes to my subscribers to a newsletter, I can actually push a message. Whenever, one of the things that I think of as a nonprofit at times is like donor exhaustion. It might not have to be with perhaps related to journalism, but where I'm always perhaps asking, right? It's always perhaps that I'm fundraising and of course I'm needing your help, but at the times I'm trying to recruit students who do not have the opportunity to engage with, with technology and with media. And so I'm trying to, attract them too. What is just hard for me to say is just, when to draw the line. I know when it comes to my campaigns, I mean, I'm pretty strategic and I know which months, of course, as a nonprofit, you look at your fiscal year and, you create strategy on when you need to bring in the money and go from there. And also, you bring your clientele, and of course, you wanna feed with stories, and wanna feed with impact and data. So, in our case, it's usually, it's at times it's an internal conversation, where programs will have a say, and our executive and our board, and as a collective team, we draw the line. In journalism, it's hard. Well, and even I think as a magazine, it's hard also too, because our magazine is part of our nonprofit. So we write about the community and empower others, but we don't write about everything because we're uplifting our mission. So even to that, it's always a collective, I don't know, it's always a collective answer, or, and it's a conversation and we say, okay, this is it. But I looked at y'all just because in that way. I mean, I don't know what you think.
So when we say line, are we talking about how certain newsrooms are like, yeah, you better not go to no protest or whatever? I'm like, yo, my line is liberation, dog. Like, listen, if I am liberated, I don't need to do this no more. What I see myself dying in the streets, and I have to draw a line. Here's the other thing, right? Here's the other thing. Whenever I think about, is this too far? I don't think the folks who are oppressing me and the folks who I'm concerned with are ever thinking about a line. They're like, how do we when they're thinking, this is the thing I really don't think we're talking about enough. Oppressors are the most innovative people. Hey, every year is a brand new approach, okay? Why should I then be thinking about, hey, how do I, so no, my line is liberation, So, yeah, that's my
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, honestly, from a personal perspective, I 100% agree, and from a professional perspective, I also 100% agree, because I just think that newsrooms and anyone producing journalism needs to just be upfront about what their values are, and because if we're talking about a line, that means that at some point advocacy of an issue would be problematic. Why would it be problematic? Maybe because we don't feel like we can trust the points of view to be presenting all of the facts or what have you. Every newsroom has opinions anyway. Every person writing news has opinions anyway. We're just not being transparent about them.
Yeah.
For the last bajillion years, the opinions that have been objective have just been white men's opinions, and that is still an opinion. And so if the problem is that we're not being upfront about our perspectives enough, that advocacy would be some sort of a conflict of interest or problem. To me, the solution to that is to be transparent about what your values are and mission is as an institution, and operate from a place of moral clarity rather than the fake, behind the curtain covering the wizard of objectivity.
I don't really have anything substantial to add. I think it's all been said. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've got time, about 15 minutes left now for questions. So we already have a hand.
Actually, the question that comes into my mind about the citizens' journalism, how do you see the role of citizens' journalism or citizen-driven content influencing journalism right now? 12 years ago, journalists or citizens overcame so many obstacles and changed regimes using their smartphones. So since then, everybody's talking about the role of citizens media. How do you see that influencing, or what role can this take in the public interest communication and elevating people's agenda?
I'd be happy to.
Yes,
answer.
go ahead. Go.
I had a lot of coffee today, so I'm like ready to talk. I think that there is so much more room in the industry for citizen journalists, and basically, what we mean when we say citizen journalists are really people who have not gone through the traditional professional pipelines in order to become journalists. And at Resolve Philly, we really try to break down the notion of the professionalization of journalism, because the tools and the skill sets that you need to become a journalist, you do not need to go to school for, that you can be taught. You do not need to get a university degree. And so there's been a lot of discourse over the past dozen or so years from the opposition to citizen journalists as well. They're not going to be objective. They're going to bring their whole selves to the table as if that's a problem, and they're not going to have the skills. Unfortunately, sorry to break this to any journalist who thinks that they're special, our skills are very transferable, and you can find them all over the place, and anybody can be a journalist. And so I think that the more we leverage people who are interested in storytelling and interested in creating journalism, the better for the industry, especially as we need more, we need diversity. I wouldn't say more diversity because we barely have any. We need diversity in our ranks. And that's, one way to do it is to break down that gatekeeping.
It's the only way we get to do our work. I mean, none of our kids have degrees, just like degrees. Some of them don't even have diplomas. And so, yeah, no, I mean, it's the only way we get to do any kind of work. Yeah.
And it's good work.
It's really good work, y'all. Maybe these kids come out guns ablaze. Oh, wait, this is violent language. They are coming out saying what needs to be said, all right?
Like you're giving them a voice. Like for us it's so interesting because, of course we're serving minorities, and at times it's the parents, all immigrants. They have not been to college, and even digital media, they don't know how to use a computer, and when perhaps they go through the program and they learn, and they feel empowered, and you see that how they learn something that they pass on to their kid. I think that's the beauty. I mean, it makes a point to it. It's just the beauty of it that perhaps there's no education, but just passing things through will make a long time impact. And social media now, it's like we're all storytellers. You kidding me? TikTok, Instagram, I mean, it's just we can just share our voice, and the more the merrier for the good.
sorry, I'm blinded. Where's the, okay, there.
No.
Is the switch on?
Hello, oh, there we go. So I have two questions. The first question on journalism, because as you were talking, it had got my mind going about public interest kind of journalism and activism. And for context, I have a severely handicapped sister. And my mother, and I remember this, when Geraldo Rivera got the Peabody Award for his story, where, for those that don't know, for uncovering an institution that had taken a severely handicapped person and abused him, and it shed a light on my mother and a community of families and people that are treated differently, and specifically this young man had cerebral palsy. And if you look at who Geraldo Rivera is today, very different. But I remember, because I was very, very young, and I was always advocating. I learned to advocate through my mother. And for her, it was like, this was our story, and this shows what happened to us. And now that's a point in time where I can reference when I want to talk about nursing home abuse, when I want to talk about institutions for the severely handicapped. And it led my mother and a group of people in my community to reach out and even be on the Oprah Winfrey Show, be on segments in CNN, helping journalists tell those unfortunately terrible stories. So I don't expect journalists on one hand to do this every day, but I think with the integrity and to find those stories can change communities and also give a lot of credibility and empathy and understanding when they can break those stories. So my question is, the first question is, could you talk about how important good journalism still is, like in those points? And then secondly, who is a journalist in your mind, or even what medium, because I think podcasts now have some really good journalists, that's doing this well? I was sitting here writing down, I thought of Amy Goodman with Democracy Now!, but just curious, so those two, those are my questions.
I think I will say that I want journalists to do that every day. But I also want journalists to be different than content creators, because there is an important, like, the mix is important. You mentioned service journalism, and all, I wish we'd stop calling different things different journalism too, like, citizen journalism. Let's just do good work.
It's journalism.
Let's
It's
just
journalism.
do good
Yes,
work. We need
yes.
to uplift as many lived experiences as possible.
Yeah.
Journalism itself, again, kind of gets back to that definition of if we are, I don't want to go into the cliches here of uplifting the, comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, of taking that critical lens, that independent critical lens, to make sure that our society is living up to the ideals and protecting everyone in it. And I want journalists to see themselves as that is their reason for being every day, and not just churning. And unfortunately, we've created this ecosystem where we're constantly creating content, we're constantly trying to get eyeballs, and none of it's journalism. So let us reinforce that is what it is, and it's everybody. It's not just somebody who works for CNN or the New York Times or the Houston Chronicle or insert your micro neighborhood blog. Everybody's a journalist. And I don't think acts of journalism occur on every communication mechanism that we've created, from carving on stone to whatever the kids are doing these days. If your state has made TikTok illegal.
I think of someone who's doing it well within the Latino market, Jorge Ramos. He's a long-time journalist for Univision. And on a weekly basis, they always highlight, of course, there's always like the immigrant, stories, but on a monthly basis, they'll focus on on a different, I mean, I say this because I've learned throughout this year, like with Latinitas, I was a long-time volunteering ambassador, and then I started to, I came in as a communications director. But some radio stations and some TV stations have dedicated community spots that they must do on a weekly basis. So it's been interesting to reach out, like if you're seeking a partnership with someone, it seems that it's required by some, and I know in radio it's required by some law, but I thought of Jorge Ramos because on every time I watch him on Sunday, he's always he's trying to lift those voices.
In terms of people that I follow who I think do this work really well, who comes to mind is Juliana Reyes, who is a reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, where I'm from, and a former colleague. I used to work there, so I'm maybe a little biased, but I think she's great. And I say that because she took over the labor beat, and I'm not sure if she's actually still solely on the labor beat anymore, but when she did, in Philadelphia, there's a long history of corruption in the major unions, the electricians union. It's a whole soap opera of corruption there. But the way that Juliana took over that beat was to focus on actual workers' rights and I guess like lowercase L labor in Philadelphia, which really took the focus away from the older white men who were in charge of the unions and all of the trials that they were a part of, frankly, and then focus it on actually like raising workers' rights and fights for a higher minimum wage and things like that. So, she took that opportunity and ran with it in service of public interest.
And I'm just going to say, make sure y'all check out Shift Press. I think that what they're doing is excellent, excellent work. And Prism is another good example here in the United States. And then outside of the US, if you look at independent digital native news throughout Latin America, they're doing incredible work, like Media Ninja in Brazil, or Alaraca in El Salvador, or La Silla Vacía in Colombia. I think those are all places where what we would call real journalism is being done, but it is still advocating and doing advocacy and taking stances and standing up for human rights. Sorry.
I think we have got a question.
Over here.
Yes. So just for context, I am actually a press manager at a litigation and advocacy civil rights nonprofit. So I was just wondering how y'all take into consideration the type of questions that you ask someone who has experienced trauma, and how you take the information from those answers that you're given to be used in a story. Because frankly, on the press manager end of things, it takes a lot of work to get people to rehash that trauma. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of trust from me and or trust in me from them to get them to speak about their stories publicly. And sometimes it's quite frustrating when it's either not really painted in the way we necessarily want it to, or there's one quote in the story. So I just want to know how you guys take into consideration asking those questions and then framing them in your story. Thank you.
I can think of that. So prior to Latinitas, I worked in the homelessness spectrum for 7+ years. And when it comes to, homelessness or the type of, service that you're providing, it's really hard to come up with stories just because of, what you said, not only the trauma, just because even their faces, they don't feel comfortable being the face, or even having a photo, it's just really hard. At times it's really hard, I call it to sell it or just to share it. But what worked for me in the past, whenever I was working with Homemade, it's a national organization. It was pretty much, I don't know if within your team or within your counselors, if you have an educational specialist, or just what questions, maybe there's 5 questions that a certain group of people might feel comfortable answering, who at times they might not be as invasive. And at times that helped me to push the story, to help to push the story out. Or if not, it was just like you being strategic of finding how your service made that person better. Those things work for me, because the trauma at times is just so hard that they don't feel, it has to be somebody who's been perhaps in your program for maybe 2+ years, if so. But if you see it from the other side, where it's like, oh, this person benefited to our program, that's a good way to engage it. It worked for me whenever I was doing that, because it's just so hard. I remember, oh, but somebody for a photo, somebody for a video or a quote, and it's just so hard to get those people. There's something.
I'd like to make a little plug for a resource that we have on our website that I think that really speaks to this. Our fellow from the previous year, Madison Karras, who's now a reporter at the Baltimore Banner, created an interview transparency guide for journalists for before, during, and after the interview process. And it is all trauma-informed. Our entire organization went through a trauma-informed training a few years ago, and can't recommend that enough. I think every journalist should. I think that should be part of J-School curriculums, because so often we are approaching people dealing with trauma, and we want to avoid re-traumatizing them, and so often we don't. But a lot of it goes into the prep work of being very transparent about how their story will be used, how the quotes will be used, what the timeline for publication is, getting back to them if something changes, making sure that they see when it comes out, giving them time to and the opportunity to take breaks during the interview and get a snack or whatever it might be. Just treating people like people.
And go ahead, sorry.
This is probably more long-term work, and work that is going to live kind of outside of those particular conversations, but I would also encourage the audience who is receiving these stories to ask themselves, or to ask them specifically, like, I'm always very keen on understanding if we're receiving certain stories in an extractive manner. It's like, are we being extractive in the way in which we're asking these questions and the way in which we're using these narratives? And so, but that is a question that you all ask yourselves internally, and the audience of those narratives. You know what I'm saying?
And with that, unfortunately, we have to say goodbye.
Can we have one question from the chat, from the Zoom? Piper, unmute, and go.
Yeah, I'll be quick. It just strikes me, with so many platforms and so many ways that audiences can be segmented now, I'm curious if you have recommendations on how journalists can then ensure that the story and the issue reaches those with the people with the power to make the change that needs to happen.
So at Shift Press, we believe our kiddos have the power to create the change, and so our primary objective is reaching them, and giving them the resources to continue doing the amazing work that they already are doing in their communities. The major challenge, I think, outside of that, is just trying to change the minds of people with money. And I'm trying to tell y'all, man, it's now even that conversation is shifting, and hey, how can we have the community who believes in our work be the ones who are sustaining the work financially? And so yeah, for us, it's been reshifting who we believe holds the power to do the things and create the change in our community.
Yes, shift the power. I love it. That is a great way to end this panel. Thank you, Lois, Salwa, Aubrey, and Matt. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Summer.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we are going to roll right into our final conversation. So Summer, if you want to turn around and go back up. And thank you all. That was amazing. That was a fabulous conversation. Thank you.
And we may have to talk more.
And thank you, Matt. I just love hearing all the different perspectives and experiences and ideas. So thank you. So let's go on up. This is going to be a conversation with you all.
Oh, I'll sit in a different chair.
Yes, we'll sit there. Exactly. All right. Yep. No, that's all right. I'll just use the handheld. Thanks. This will be quick. Yeah. All right. So So before, this is a conversation about moving the work forward. Oh, okay, all right. Okay, thank you, Jess. About moving the work forward. But first, I want to give a little plug. I don't know if you noticed in the previous, the panel before the one where Cody was speaking, and Cody was talking about the Journal of Public Interest Communications. And yes, Cody right over there. So what he didn't tell you is that he is one of the editors, new editors of the journal, and we have revamped the journal. It is for both academics and practitioners, and we have some practitioner content. And we just put out the first issue of the revamped journal, so please check it out. It is journalpic.org. Journalpic.org. Okay. All right, so let us launch into our conversation. This is, we did this last year, and it was really wonderful. We got some great ideas. This is how we're going to carry the work forward now that we've exchanged and heard all these great ideas and surfaced all of these issues that we want to address. So
with that, I think the first thing that we want to know from you all is, what is one takeaway that you're going to go home and implement? Whether it is, if you're a communicator, a practitioner, and you're going to do it in your everyday job, or if you are an educator, something that you're going to bring into the classroom, or a researcher, something that you've learned that you're going to put into your research. Tell us one concrete thing you're going to implement once you get home.
Yes. I am going to, and I didn't get the direct quote. Oh, lo siento. Okay, I didn't get the direct quote, but Loisy, is she there? Are they still here? Loisy? When they said, the advocacy stops when I stop dying.
Yeah.
I'm taking that home to my courses, right? And where that line, that question you asked, 100%, that's going in.
all right, thank you. And I'm wondering, can one of our amazing grad students help run the mic around? Nader, thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Who else wants to share? I'm looking. I know you've got great ideas.
Tell us. There's one.
Ah, yes. Sorry, the light is like blinding here.
I really just feel like I need to go home and make a binder. Where are you? I'm still stuck on the binder of great ideas, so and strategies. So I may want to peek at that binder and then make my own.
All right, a binder of great ideas. Okay. Other people. Chinwen.
I think the one takeaway is that we should keep using the word PIC in our daily routines.
Okay. Others?
There's one back in the back.
Oh, okay. Myrna.
My takeaway is there was a concept that I heard this morning. It was different ideas of labor and the hierarchy of labor. And coming from Egypt, I really want to understand how we frame labor, because a lot of workers in developing countries, they work in economies that are not really known by scholars. It's the informal economy. And so I really want to dig deeper and understand how we can use public interest communications to allow them to, to include their economy in the formal economy that we understand. Thank you.
That's fabulous. Thank you. How about anyone online? Go ahead and just shout out. Lori says, I can't read it.
Awareness that there is no precipitate.
Lori, do you want to just unmute and tell us?
Say it? This is hard to watch. Awareness that there's no prescription around syllabus and content development. It's evolving, and we need to give ourselves grace as we develop that content. We're all early in the journey.
All right, that's excellent. Thank you. And yeah.
So I would say I've already been planning to sort of revamp my journalism syllabus in particular, but so many good ideas today. I can't wait to go home and really deconstruct it And then, of course, tomorrow is going to help with that as well.
All right, thank you. Do we have any others online? Just go ahead and unmute if you do. Okay, any others in the room?
I see a hand.
Yes, okay.
So first, I want to say the entire experience has been wonderful. And I think it's so interesting, and I'm going to take it back to my faculty and share and share with them what I have learned about PIC and see how we might be able to implement it, in our curriculum. But I do want to say one thing. The statement that anyone can be a journalist, I disagree.
Okay.
If someone with 30 to 40 years of experience from Texas to New York City, I think we have to be very careful because there's so many people out there with their alternative facts that will hear that and think that they are, or say they are journalists, and that's happening right now. So we have to be very careful, if we say that anyone can be a journalist.
All right,
Okay.
thank you for that,
Yeah.
Sabrina.
Thank
But
you.
I am super excited that it looks as though Texas Southern University is on its way to having public interest communications. Yay! Anyone else? Any other? Yes, okay, Kristen.
Yeah, I want to look for other opportunities to have practitioners and researchers getting together and having conversations. It's such a good reminder to come to something like this and hear from the other side. Going to conferences that are all academic can get really insular. So looking for opportunities to bridge that gap as much as possible.
Exactly, yes. You all came up with some amazing ideas this morning, and I wrote all of them down because I would love to pursue them. So, yes, someone.
Ever thought of perhaps implementing, I know it sounds crazy, but like a nonprofit? I just think it would be so beneficial. I don't know, it's just later on, but thanks to, you guys reaching out, I learned of public interest communications, and it's something that I want to plug in, I get plugged in just because it's so valuable. So thank you for creating a safe space where we can learn and make connections, because I just think it's great. That was just my input.
Thank you so much.
No, you're
Salwa.
welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you. We do have our Center for Public Interest Communications at the University of Florida, which does a huge amount. It does research. It works with public interest organizations. So it kind of functions, I think, and I'm not too sure what you're envisioning, but it has a lot of those functions. But great idea. Thank you. All right. Does anyone have any ideas about how to work collectively to move the work forward? Any thoughts on that? It's a harder one. Yes, Gina.
I wonder, I think most people in the room know, but if you don't know, we have some regular meetings throughout the year on Zoom, so continuing those and opportunities to talk. And then we've also broken out into sort of groups of activity. But I wonder also if we should do quarterly or half-yearly, semi-annually, practitioner group, researcher group, educator group, just to connect. How's it going? Whatever. That might be a way to provide people opportunities to connect.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
With happy hour connotations.
I know. I love that idea. Yeah. Go ahead. Who's next?
So I had this question I wanted to ask an earlier panel. We didn't have enough time, but I think it's related to how to move this forward. And as a practitioner, I'm sensing a need for a certificate program, perhaps. Debt and having 2 college-age kids means I'm not really looking to do a master's program, but I would love to do a certificate. And related to that, as I mentioned yesterday, I come out of social work. In social work, I had to have a practicum. I had to work with somebody who was already in the field, who had been out of their master's program for at least 2 years and had the master's degree. You don't need to have that, but perhaps that same sort of structure of people who have that certificate, people who are already maybe doing PIC for different nonprofits, become your go-to for interns when you have them come out of your own program, people and agencies that they can go immediately work with to help further their own education at the same time as helping that agency out. So I think that might be an interesting way to further both your immediate work with practitioners as well as your programs with the college students.
I love the idea of a PIC intern network.
Yes, and the certificate program, that's awesome. Thank you for that. That's great. Yes, Wenlin. Oh, wait for the mic, if you can wait for the mic.
She lost her voice during our conference.
Oh, no.
So she wanted to express that she really wanted to involve more policymakers in the research and projects that she does in the future.
Okay, all right, that's great. That's bridging another divide, definitely. All right. We have, Maya.
I'm just going to speak up and say we do have a PIC certificate. It's 9 credits as part of the online masters. So please do that.
Thank you. I totally spaced and forgot about that. And Anne has some, yes.
I think Anne's next. Go ahead, Anne.
I just have a quick thing.
Wait for the mic.
I just wanted to offer in response to that, yes, we have an online specialization in public interest communications. We have an undergraduate track, and starting this fall, the Center for Public Interest Communications is going to launch a badging program. It's a 4 topic, help me, Matt. It's a 4-session badging program in public interest communications where you can learn some of the essential frameworks of it. So it's going to be online. It's going to be available. We're going to do cohorts of 25 people so that you can also connect with other public interest communicators and really build meaningful relationships with them.
Yay.
Very cool.
How much is it?
Good question. The cost is still being determined. That is the answer for the folks online who didn't hear that. All right, Andrea.
I just wanted to plug again for something that somebody mentioned today about divisions within ICA, NCA, or whatever CA would take PIC. It feels like it's something that we could get some momentum behind. Again, I'm a newbie to all of that kind of division creating, but I just wanted to put that back on the map.
Thank you. I made a note of that. Yes, definitely, because I know we've talked about that. Any folks online? Ideas about how we can carry the work forward together as a group?
I'm really quick to piggyback on the ICA thing. There is a interest group for social activism, social work, and social justice. Very new, not involved with it. Sorry, I have other divisions, but somebody just get plugged in. So it already exists. Somebody just needs to.
They had actually a talk about journalism and objectivity 2 years ago, I think. Yeah,
That
it
was
great.
us.
Oh, that was us. You were there. Perfect.
Yes, we
and those two, and
Yes.
Anne as well.
Yes, we presented at ICA 2 years ago on public interest communications, but I think
But
division.
yay,
we
I'm
want
so
to
glad
make
for
it.
bringing that up.
That's right. Exactly. All right. Other thoughts, other ideas. These are great. Okay. All right.
So the other thing we wanted to know was what more you all want to learn. What did you not learn about over the last 2 days, or not hear about, or not get to discuss that you really wish you would have had an opportunity to get some kind of exchange going? We talked about everything and learned
We
everything.
covered it all. I know. Yes, Ginger. The mic is coming.
I think, and honestly, I wouldn't want to get rid of anything, so I think this would be in addition. So just keep us here longer. But I think it would be great to go into a little bit more depth with a practitioner. And even a practitioner that has partnered with a researcher and how that has all come together to learn about the change that they have affected.
Like a case study, one-on-one.
Exactly.
That'd be great.
All right, thank you. Yes, Wenlin.
Yeah, and also to piggyback off that, could be like identify a successful or working partnership that has already established between the two, and then maybe invite them to share experience, lessons learned, or what they believe made the collaboration successful.
All right, excellent. Thank you. That is helpful. Kristen.
I want to learn more about other methodologies that practitioners are using. There was a lot of phrases that were dropped. I'm quickly Googling what it is. So just having a more intensive, in-depth exchange of what those things are and how we could use them back and forth would be really helpful.
Okay, great. Others?
Following up on that, Kristen, so tomorrow we have our curriculum workshop. Maybe a half-day workshop instead of on curriculum, on research and on like an actual methodology. Let's talk about these different things that we can, and theories and different aspects that go into PIC research maybe.
I see the thumbs up on that. All right, we have, yes, Mona Lisa.
So from a community perspective, this was my very first understanding of public interest communications and thinking of like practitioner as an activist, as far as like combining it with the skills of being a professional communicator. And I think of, it would be great to do maybe a call for nonprofits, explain what public interest communication is, and kind of have a forum where it's like, we're going to have this conference if you would like to be listed as someone to potentially partner with, either in target areas of the schools, so that they too can learn or at least offer a profile, and they would want to work on the research side, or even just, understanding what it is you're doing to empower their missions.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So you're thinking of organizations that might want to work with academics. That's a great idea. That is. I love it.
So bouncing off what Mona Lisa just said, I know the Public Relations Division at AEJMC in DC, we're doing like roundtables with nonprofits and advocacy groups addressing some of their communication challenges and giving them strategies. That could be something that could be done with maybe some of the grad students or undergrads or whatever if we have when we have the conference again. I think too, what I'd be interested in is looking at theory of change and how to map that for journalism. How do you map that for a StructComm class? How do you map that? That would be incredibly helpful too.
That, I love that.
I do
That's
too.
awesome. Thank you, Natalie, for that. Any folks online? Just go ahead and unmute if you have ideas. Nope. Okay. Yes, please unmute.
Oh man, I was hoping to not talk again. So the questions around LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn is just a tremendous platform that we could be using a lot more to create networks and create professional development, opportunities about jobs, research, if someone were to really start digging in around that for this field.
All right, thank you. I see Andrea and then Natalie.
Something that I would value talking about is helping students find internships and jobs. I know how to do that in journalistic spheres, right? But I would love to learn beyond where the networks. And honestly, how to prepare, how much money students actually make in this field. I don't have any idea. So that would be useful, those kind of conversations.
Okay, that's great, and that ties a little bit into the curriculum development and the idea of introducing students to the concept of, yes, you can make a career out of public interest work, so that's great, thank you.
And not only it's about talking about like the career opportunities, but I think there could be even the potential of like career fair, like long term. But I really do think that if this is the place where people can see professors, schools that have this, connecting them with the nonprofits too, or the advocacy groups that need that, is incredibly important. So I think that that would be a whole other lane too, along with the career navigation stuff that would help, especially for people who have accreditation issue, have to worry about accreditation or those types of things. That would be especially helpful to have that connection.
Thank you for that. Cody.
I wonder if Natalie would lend your panel idea that you just mentioned in your last one to PIC. It would be cool to see how, if we could, over the course of 2 or 3 days, just try to give folks a solution to this comms challenge that they're facing, or how can we all come together? And if we're inviting nonprofits, let's, have 6 of them, small groups. Let's do some problem solving and actually generate these ideas and solutions.
Yeah, that is great. Yes, because that you can, if you're doing it and you go through that doing, then you can teach it, right? All right, Anne.
I'm just thinking about what Andrea was just talking about, and Natalie, what you were saying, and I'm wondering, would it be helpful if we started doing like an annual or biannual industry survey to begin to hear like what are the sectors that people are working in, what are they getting paid, what are they thinking about, what skills do they need?
Sorry, I'm taking the mic again. Absolutely, because when we look at this from a public relations standpoint, I know what people in agencies make. I know what people in corporations make. I can easily find that information. But in terms of students who are doing this type of advocacy work, it is impossible to get these details. And when you're trying to work with parents and students, recruiting them to school, having this information would be especially important, especially for those of us who are not at a University of Texas. If you're at Lamar University or if you're at Xavier University, those parents, especially for those who are first gen students of color, they want to make sure that they're getting jobs when they get out of school. Can we show them that PIC is a way to have a career and also be successful and also care for themselves? I think that's going to be extremely important for building programs as well.
That's great. And M&R, I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a public interest communications agency based in DC. It's the initial M as in Mary, ampersand R. They do an annual survey of public interest organizations, and a lot of it is focused on the fundraising, but I think they might also ask about positions and communications positions, and that's an annual thing that they do, and there's a lot of good information in there. So that's something to check out. Others? Yes.
So maybe this is already happening in your academic social media circles, but I'm not part of it. A lot of times, activist organizations, the biggest consumers of this type of skill, are reactive to what's going on in the political environment. So there was an idea that occurred to me when we were doing the breakouts. Research is great, but sometimes we just need to have immediate ideas. What is happening? Something's gone viral, or something that is an attack on our particular cause is coming, and it's having some resonance. Why do we think it's having resonance? Do we need to understand how to respond to it better? Or is there something that's just, hey, it's viral, how can we take advantage of this? This is a quirky idea, but we could use it. What are its limitations maybe, but also what are its benefits? I think there's sort of an immediate response sort of network, so that we don't have to wait 2 years for the research that says, hey, this was a...
Right, no, I like that idea, and that's kind of like a crisis comms for public interest, right? So I love that, that's great. Oh, okay, Piper, yes.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by how we're opening up and putting more seats at the table, wanting to bring in practitioners and nonprofits. To that list, I would recommend pulling in funders and those who are funding some of the nonprofits, because having been a practitioner, I can tell you that some of those, when we start doing the salary surveys, it's low sometimes. And thinking also about all of the activities. I mean, I feel like that's been a theme that we all know, all the things that really need to be done and how often there's not funding for them. So just a thought, if we're pulling up more chairs, let's bring some folks that have checkbooks.
Thank you for that. Yes, Rubino.
Is there a publication that documents the PIC, just from the very beginning, that shows, everything that you've been doing? So, like, say, I can take this to my faculty and let them really peruse everything that's been happening. That's just not strictly, maybe it could be a PDF, but if you had a document here, that would be very helpful,
Right.
or documents that I could take back and share, for everyone to sort of review. That would be
Right.
helpful.
No, I appreciate that. I think, and I can definitely assemble some information for you. I don't think we have something in one place. We have a lot of resources on our on the Center for Public Interest Communications website. There's also the West Virginia, and Julia was here earlier. West Virginia University has a research center on public interest communications. That's part of this this work as well. So we can put something together. But that's a great idea. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, Natalie.
So I know I bring this up often, but I do think that there is a chance and a need for us to discuss, when we introduce PIC into our classroom or into our larger settings, there's also the opportunity for this to be used for regressive strategies and for regressive movements. And I think that there is something that needs to be said about that, and maybe how do we think through that, because I think that that is a barrier for some people to integrate this into their classrooms, knowing that they have a student who runs the Students for Greg Abbott campaign in their classroom, and this is going to be used for that. So how exactly are we addressing or thinking through or dealing with that within our classrooms of students who might use this for things that aren't necessarily in the public good and don't care about human rights? So just something to think
That's
about.
an excellent question, and something we've definitely talked about at UF, and we haven't come up with a solution yet, but I think having a session here about that and talking about that would be great. Anyone else?
I have the mic, so I
Oh, okay, Nader.
can I say something? At UF, we have the agency that does serious business with profitable companies. I think if we can start thinking about a unit that is for outreach, for local community. I know Gainesville is not a big town, but I think it also gives an opportunity for social intervention with the local community, and maybe we can identify some activists and professionals in town that we can start communicating with.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. Anything else? Yes, Ginger.
Since he brought up corporations, I'll throw this out there, which I don't know that this would be the right venue, but the idea of, which just popped into my head, pick practitioners embedding in corporate social responsibility departments at corporations and impacting change there to try and bring that into the organization and really have those organizations, which frankly I frequently see as just talking the talk, to actually try to, from the inside, get them to walk the walk. Again, I don't know that this is it, but I could see someone from this educational background moving into that role and trying to affect change there.
All right, that is intriguing. Thank you. Lots of interesting potential connections there, for sure. Yes, Anne. That's fine.
I think one of the things that we need to wrestle with in this field, particularly as we think about preparing students for careers, is what lived experience means in public interest communications. And I think from my career experience, I think that my observation is that many of the people in the highest paid positions with the most power are not the people with lived experience. And that the people who have lived experience are more doing the grassroots activism on their own time for free. And thinking about how this curriculum and what we're building together creates that path for lived experience to be in those positions of power and influence, and to really honor that and to think with great intentionality about what that looks like, how we honor it in our classroom, and how we promote that and make space for it in the workplace.
Thank you. All right, Polly.
One thing that I was really intrigued by was the 6 spheres in which we can imagine, or we can talk about ways that public interest communication can happen. And for me, I would really like to drill down on that a bit more. What does it look like in the market? What does that mean? What does it look like? What does it mean in social norms? How do we manifest this in that realm, in that sphere? Certainly policy, media, communities of interest, activism, those things we can easily imagine. But I'm pretty intrigued by these more challenging spheres and how we can manifest this sort of practice and thinking in those spheres. And
Right.
teach other people to as well, obviously.
Yes, exactly. Well, we're going to be, if you're attending the workshop tomorrow, we're going to be talking about that a little bit before we dive into the one-on-ones. So, but that's a great, I know we have people taking notes, so I think we've got great ideas for next year, right? All right, so I think we're at time. I want to thank everybody, and first of all, a huge thank you to all our moderators and speakers who put so much planning and effort into this. I also want to thank a lot of the people who helped plan it. Summer here at University of Houston was a huge, enormous help, answering all my emails, all in text, all the time. Andrea Otonius was on every single planning call, so thank you so much. And we also have others in the Educators Network who contributed and helped with the planning. Gina Valerio, Natalie Tyndall, huge help. Thank you for helping with the planning. That's what. Chinwen Dong also. Julia Faustino, who I think is not in the room right now. And of course, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes to put this together, and I want to acknowledge those people. The tech, which has run so seamlessly, took a lot to put together, a lot of planning and assembly and work to run. So a huge thank you to Matt Sheehan and Craig Lee for doing an amazing job. And a huge shout out. I cannot thank her enough for all that she does all the time. You know her as the person who designed this set and put it together, but she does so much more. Our University of Florida College of Journalism Communications event manager, Jessica Asagueda. Huge thanks. A thank you to someone who wears multiple hats. He is an adjunct for us at University of Florida, and also he has been taking photographs throughout. Joe Newman. All right. And we had this year a couple of people who have been helping me, especially for a couple of months, and if you've looked at any of the social media, they are purely responsible for it because I certainly did not do it, and I just want to give them a huge shout out because they have been incredibly helpful throughout, and that is Mel Mueller and Faith Corbett. And finally, you've noticed that we've had people running around with the microphone and holding time cards and taking notes and monitoring the online chat. Those are our University of Florida grad students who I recruited to be volunteers. So I want to thank them, and that is Kara Felton, Angel McGee, Myrna Abdulal, Luna Gonzalez, Ryan Anderson, Nader Dagger, Sophia Vidal, and Ginger Mundi. All right, huge thanks, because it takes a huge amount of work and effort to put this together. So thank you to everyone. And that's it for today's program.
Thank you, Angela.
It takes a village. It was a village. Thanks. This is wonderful to see everyone come together. I just really hope that people got a lot out of it. But we're not totally done yet, because we do have our grad student meeting right after this. So if you're a grad student, please, Nader is putting together a grad student network, so please meet with him. And if you are coming with us to the Climate Justice Museum, please meet downstairs at 6 p.m. We are going to take ride shares over to the museum together. And then when the museum tour is over, you can go your separate ways. There are dinner places around there, and then you can find your way back, again, using rideshare. You can do that. And some of you we will see tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the Flamingo Room, not here, but in the Flamingo Room for our syllabus workshop. And I'm really looking forward to that. Just know that there won't be breakfast served with that. That's just coffee and tea, so get food beforehand. For those of you who I won't see again, thank you so much for coming. Really enjoyed meeting all of you and learning and sharing, and I hope to see you again. So thank you.
Thank you. For the tour, should we have the cabs or the Ubers waiting for people?